confidential that we're talking about, and it'll just be some sort of random ideas and
Yeah.
bouncing around different approaches and whatnot. Right, hopefully that should be streaming. So yeah, we're talking mainly about CI components, but that might be a bit of a stretch. There might be a few tangents we go off on.
That's
Um, if it helps, I'm just gonna try and move all my windows off of my screen, and then I'm gonna share I can't remember if it's a merge request or an issue, or there's a conversation that we've essentially started.
there's a few of them.
But yeah, there are actually definitely the couple that sort of come to mind. We've got the release building a release component
Yeah.
as part of an existing.
Toolkit.
I yeah, I struggle with the terminology a little
It's
bit
dangerous.
because
It's
we
dangerous. You have something called like others or tools or toolkits, and they're
but
going to be the dumping
also
ground.
like we or I, whatever you want to call it, tend to refer to a collection of components as a component, if that makes sense.
I've been
So
trying to call them component libraries because I find calling those repos components is a bit misleading because they're a collection of components.
yeah, I like that. I like that. But we need to sort of, I don't know, officialize, let's make up a word,
Yeah.
officialize that terminology at some point. So yeah, we
Yeah.
do just call this the catalog, and at the moment it's CICD, but from what I understand, we'd love to have, maybe Docker images in there and other things in the future as well. So it's
Huh.
more than just a CI/CD catalog. But I hope that's public knowledge
That
anyway.
could be confusing. You'd have to have some way to have different types of things, right?
Absolutely, this would need to be filterable to allow you to, yeah, 100%. But yeah, I think the go
Funny
on.
enough, sorry for interrupting you. I have a lot of experience building Docker files for very complicated toolkits, just as an
Okay.
FYI.
Oh, cool, cool, cool. I
I
noticed
came
with
from a manufacturing company with a lot of embedded development. So, and I was the staff's platform engineer. So
cool.
I assembled a lot of complicated compiler tool chains and whatnot, Dockerize them, and release them to customers so they can use them in their pipelines.
Oh, awesome, awesome. We'll go off on another tangent in a minute then and talk about the GDK. I'll come to that. I just finished this tangent briefly. So
Yes.
yeah, the first thing which we're fairly sure is, I don't know if a no, yeah, I'm going to say a no-brainer. And have we got an issue? Yes, you
Yeah.
created an issue. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Um,
It's kind of
I
stalled.
ping,
The
go on.
MR seems to have stalled.
Oh, I must admit again, I hadn't even. That's part of the reason I suggested a call was to force a bit of focus from me at least. So let's have a look what you've passed it.
I,
So
yeah.
Justin then maybe passed it Regenda. We cannot enforce rules here for when to make a release.
Yeah, he didn't like the fuzzy comparison. I only had that there because it was already in the toolkit on their release. I was happy to remove it though. It actually made me slightly uncomfortable. So I did that.
Gotcha.
It should be addressed.
Yeah.
Just see
Um,
CI commit tag. That's what I've always done for similar things as well. If the commit tag is there, release it. It does present a potential issue because there's convention that has to be followed here. Okay, so you think about two different scenarios. The toolkit's primarily focused around people building components, right?
yep.
But it's not technically strictly constricted to that. So what if somebody uses it for some other project just so they can cut a release simply? Well, then
Mhm.
forcing constraints on what the version tag can look like could be overly restrictive. But if it's a CI/CD component, it has to be Semver, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would go further. I think I've got another argument that
Yes.
what if I want a release to be cut every time I merge domain?
Yes. You
So
can't.
the
You can't. Releases have to be associated with a tag.
But I think that your release component could create a tag and a release and can do everything, right?
That is true. See, in my opinion, though, like you want to hit the 80%, right? Let's hit the 80% of what the user wants. That complexity is going to be very contingent upon how they want to do things. And the way components are structured right now, a lot of the variability in the object attributes, not the scripts, but the object attributes are not conditional based. And when you get into some of those things like rules, it gets really gross really fast if you try to make that customizable by the user. Honestly, I think it's a big coming with how it's the whole structure right now, components.
So I'm trying to remember if and where I've done
I
and if
saw
you've
it
seen
and
this
it
as well.
made me shudder.
So
I try to remember where I saw it.
Where we're overriding stuff. Is that what you're...
Well, particularly when you're trying to do the rules. There was a project. No, that's fine. There's one project that does it for rules somehow, and it was scary. Not this. No. It might have been. I don't know if it was OpenTofu.
I think it probably was. That's what am I going to say? Like a real kind of complex one. So I might shy away from that for a minute. But yeah, you're right. It's challenging. But I do think ultimately any of this can be overridden, right? So,
well, yeah, technically. So this is something that's not well documented, okay? Honestly, it wasn't immediately obvious to me, but I figured it out because of some random comment somebody made, you can override. I said, no, you can't. And they went, oh, you tricky. So if you, in your main GitLab CI YAML, if you use the same job name as what's being imported and you wrote rules there, it will override it because it will take precedence when it does its merge.
Yeah,
and absolutely. That's not obvious to a user though, right?
And I mean, it also in my mind, it sort of says, well, why don't we make that more deliberate? Like when we include the component, why not put the overrides just in the include almost? That would feel a lot more deliberate.
It's like it's a job, right? So you have your include, you have your component, and your component's now your job. You have your inputs, which are like variables, and then you can have a rules statement right there to give the conditional when I'm going to use this job. And you can add variables there if you wanted, if you want to make specific variables for that. I think that's much more intuitive. And then you can do a proper merge.
Yeah. I think we're obviously heading down like, so it's getting better. Let's rewind. Okay, so yeah, it's suggested to make this more flexible. You've gone with that, right? I haven't looked at, so forgive me for doing a real time sort of catching up on this.
So... Yeah, he had mentioned that stage name being different, but the funny thing is, I took a look. Everybody uses release, and I mean everybody. So I told him that. He gave me a thumbs up. So I think he probably took a look and said, yeah.
So the great thing is you're allowing us to, anyone can override that. I got a feeling that I kind of want to say that I maybe use deploy, but maybe I do use release. I don't know. I don't like the way stages kind of force you to, where you can use the default stages and that works. But then if you deviate from that, because release isn't...
Well, that was always a big problem with templates, right? Templates made it very confusing because it really wanted... Like, here's the thing. I hate using all lowercase for stage names and job names. I hate it. But always with templates and with these jobs, they're all using the lowercase. So you actually use the deploy there.
But that doesn't mean I'm
almost
sort of
everybody. Almost. No. I looked at like 5 and I said, that's enough. And I missed this one, of course.
No, I probably merely did it because it's a default stage. I think that's probably the only reason that I picked on it. My background, actually, I'm sort of less... I don't do a lot of official releasing. Generally, like my process is once it gets to main or master, that's kind of main or master references, replicates, whatever you want to call it, what's in production. So... Well, not so much that, but there's no need to give it a version
Yes.
Because it's like, well, you know, when you merge into the test branch, it's deployed to test. When you merge into the master branch, it's deployed to production. That's how I've worked in the past, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, an interesting approach that I ended up taking within the last couple of years, I have no versions in my code base whatsoever. I have my GitLab CI YAML with conditionals based upon a CI commit tag being present. Even with Go programs, I'll use some special linker options so it injects that into a variable for me dynamically. So there's only one place to touch the version when you have something that's versionable, right? Because not everything, if you're doing CD, versions are meaningless.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, again, this is the sort of thing that I suppose it would be a breaking change if we change it at some point, but like it doesn't really stress me too much, you know.
Yeah, and I told him I'm fine, I'm cool with changing it. And I just said I think most component offers will then feel compelled to override it. So if you're trying to hit the 80%, if this is focused on component authors, release seems to be a pattern that's emerging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must admit, even from a job name point of view, I'd probably say that release is just on its own is possibly the most common for, but I'm completely guessing. So
yeah, I've had projects that I've worked on a lot of projects, and it depends sometimes. Different things, a different stage name makes more sense because you might have multiple stages.
You might also have, I guess,
and then you might deploy the release. And so
you might deploy. Yeah, you might even have multiple, like more of a mono repo where you're releasing or deploying multiple things. So you need some, but again, that's why we make it an input so that we can override it if we need to, right?
Yeah. This was a great point here, so I implemented that. I made description be an input now, so that my default one could be overridden.
Cool. So I'm going to challenge a little bit to show you. So
this is a README.
Okay. Do you recall on that other one I suggested you get rid of all the inputs from the README?
So on mine, that's what I've done. But on an existing code base, I try not to make big changes so that the authors don't feel like I'm trying
to and again, I would probably suggest we do it in a follow-up MR or a separate, but just because it's not related to this change. So
that's right. Well, take a look. If you go to the top level group, Jitsu-Dojo, I'll put it in chat here. Awesome. I moved my, oh my goodness, my keyboard. I use Colmac Mod DH, but when I'm on my laptop and my keyboard, there's a top level group here. I'll give you the full link. Oh man, why does it try to capitalize stuff? .com/jitsu-dojo. There.
Probably be
under GitLab.
I thought I'd actually been.
Well, there's a link from there. Click on that. I have a link in my README dojo.
Yeah.
So I got this OSS approved. So if you go to components, so I don't have to pay for my job minutes.
Amazing. No, that's great. That's great. I've done it for a number of groups.
So take a look at like Kaneko. Now scroll down to the README. So what I found, because when you go to the README, if you have no reference to the various things you have in there, so here's another limitation. I think in the components, they need to have a way for you to give a description for them. So when people are on this page for each, like lint, I'd like to give a sentence or two describing what it does and have it viewable here so that people are not having to jump back and forth. Because when you look at the inputs and you look at the name, it gives you a certain amount, but it doesn't really give you context, right? So if you're a potential consumer, like if you're looking at API docs, you're going to want to see a description of the function, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have that. I think in the spec block for a component, there should be not inputs, but a description field where you can give a description of that individual component, and then it would show up right in this components tab.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Sorry. Again, I'm thinking, well, we've got this, but this is at the collection level, right? Not at the job job level sort of thing.
Because I'm finding a lot of components, that there's an overarching theme, but then some of those jobs can be not immediately obvious based upon just the job name. And so I'm having to go to the README to look it up. So what I ended up doing on Kaneko and Python is in the README, I didn't give the inputs and stuff. I just call out each individual component and give a brief blurb about what it does. So at least
yeah, but it'd be great. Definitely, we kind of want to merge these two things, if you ask. Yeah, so we want to be able to supplement in some way, shape, or form, but have this auto generate, and yeah, that'd be really nice.
Because that's what Terraform does, right? But the difference is authors generally write the markdown for all their inputs and stuff. I think auto-generating the component input docs and usage is great. But then have the README portion at top where you can kind of give an overview. And then I think within each component, if you can add a description field, that'd be like everything I want.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I just wanted to show you quickly is this is how I've always released. And I think this is documented in the GitLab docs. And what it does is it generates the changelog for you. So if we look...
Can you show me what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to...
It's hard to find. Or you want to go there? Oh, and then you click the release.
I can't remember if it's... No, you're right. It is in the release. So it basically, you have a changelog on your... a trailer on your commits, which says, is it a feature? Is it a fix?
I've never seen that.
Whatever. And then, it collects those and puts headers in. And so I'll show you.
That is nifty. It does require a lot of convention for somebody to be able to take advantage of it. But it is cool. I've never seen that. Mind putting that in chat real quick? That link?
No. So I'll put a couple in there. So we've got one to that documentation, and let's do one to... Oh, where did I have it? This, I guess. And this is definitely, I mean, I guess some videos and stuff like this are great for sharing, but there's definitely some improvement that we can do. The docs, I think, one of the first places that we could sort of focus and to suggest some better sort of best practices and convention, because it's very hard when you can do whatever you want, however you want.
It's great, but it's started. Like Perl, right? You can shotgun yourself so easy by getting fancy. I can't read this. I have no clue what this does, but it works, so don't touch it.
Absolutely. So, okay, so we talked a little bit about release. I'll try and follow up, or even if we just give Rajendra a bit of a nudge on that. So, say I personally, if I had have reviewed it, I would have probably suggested release as the D. But these are all opinionated things. But feel free to. I probably would have done release. I'm happy with the stage that you've gone for release. I'm not really as fussed about that, but I do like, even if we can do, I don't know if this is something where you could have some bash in here that said, if the person's provided a description for the release, use that. Otherwise, maybe fall back to this or have this as a bool, like a true or false. Do you want to use the API?
I'll say one thing. Your before script is, in my opinion, an anti-pattern. Your
mean that we should...
if something happens, it's line 17 and 18. It's dangerous.
Yeah, but what I was going to say is, you suggesting that we should basically have a Docker image, which is this with this.
Or update that to include that if that's a common pattern.
Yeah,
because that gives me heebie-jeebies looking at that. I would never do that.
No, that's understandable.
Sometimes you kind of have to. Like, I am guilty of doing pip. But at least with pip, if you bring in your cache, it's basically a no-op, right? But with like APK or apt-get, it's a heavy operation. And if there's any problem with the package repository, your pipelines fail, right? It's just...
what are we going to search for? I'm interested to see if there's an issue. There
Oh,
you go. 4
4
months
months ago.
ago. And what has anyone?
Oh, this is Victor.
I'm not against it. Do I make a full? Oh, so some basically we said we're good to go, but we just need someone to do
If
it.
you
So
send that to me, I'll do it real quick.
you're a star. I should know your
I'm
handle
laid
by
off. I
now.
don't have like I'm just trying to keep myself from getting depressed. So I'm keeping myself busy while I'm job searching. So that's why I've been doing so much. It's like I need to keep my
No,
head.
no, no. Well, once you get started, you're not allowed to stop.
Okay,
You,
I'll take
I didn't do that.
it's Jitsu Sama. Yeah, it's a weird. It's my handle from way back
Why is it not letting me?
because I'm not a member.
Yeah, I guess it's not as clever as I'd like it. There we go.
Yeah, when you go to the assign drop down, it'll only show people that are a member of the top level down, or this project or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, gotcha. Right, awesome. Okay, lots and lots of tangents, but we've talked a bit about release. Shall we move on to test, or have you got
Whatever
any
you
other?
like. Whatever you like.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, test. Do you happen to have a link? Because I think the conversation we started was actually in a completely unrelated merge
Oh,
request
yes.
or issue.
Go to my Jitsu Dojo, next tab over.
Yep.
Go to components, and then click on tester.
Cool.
And then go to issues.
This is where we had the conversation. No, that's perfect. I think it started maybe in a merge request for Python or something, and then we moved
I can't remember. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yes.
Awesome.
It did.
Awesome. Okay. So let me recap again.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So we talked about and we agreed that they're kind of unit tests. Yeah, okay. So what we're sort of
actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to give you some context. I was struggling with what to use when I started, because really it's meeting where your users are, but at the same point, I wanted GitLab to potentially take this on at some point. So I was trying to debate. GitLab loves Ruby for all the things, right?
Yep.
And if I support RSpec, it'd be easy for any GitLab team to say, "Oh yeah, I can own this. This is my jam." But at the same time, what would users do? Well, it depends. Like some users would love Ruby RSpec, some would love PySpec, some would love a command line utility that we custom wrote that they pass some arguments with. Some would like some simple YAML comparison, right? And so I was struggling with what's the best option. I don't think RSpec necessarily is. It's just an option. So I saw what you wrote, and so the last comment on this thread, that program DYFF, it'll actually allow you to do a semantic comparison between two YAML files. So if you have your fields ordered differently, you have white space, it will still pass.
Gotcha. So what I had in my head, I don't know if I articulated this at all or well or whatever, but
you gave it a good effort.
I love the idea of Ruby because obviously, being deeply ingrained in GitLab, we love Ruby and RSpec. But what I kind of had in mind is that the default, let's say it's a Docker image that we build that's got Ruby and it's got almost like a default RSpec that runs out of the box that basically says, look in this folder for input files and look in this folder for output files, YAMLs, and essentially does what diff does. That's kind of it.
That's what you were
I mean,
okay.
You could argue that we don't, if we're going to do that, we don't even use Ruby. But then my sort of thinking was that you could supplement, you could basically add RSpecs in, which, like you said, if you're familiar with Ruby, would allow you to do like 100 tests in 10 lines of code rather than 100 tests. You'd need 100 YAML files, sort of thing. So you could do these.
And then we could have a library built in that would ingest, turn it into a hash, your YAML file, so that you could very easily do that.
Exactly. That's how I saw it. But like, so again, it wouldn't care about the what's the indentation or whatever,
Right.
because it would ingest it as a hash and do like, some sort of
No,
so
that'd be a great
that's
opportunity for me to learn Ruby because I've been trying to find an excuse.
awesome. But equally, like, but my sort of, as I was discussing that, trying to explain it, it made me think, well, if they don't want to write any aspects, if they are just going to use the YAML option, well, should we not just use something like, so it's almost like, well, if you've got to write the aspects, I mean, we could, I'm just trying to think what we could, like, arguably we could use multiple languages and we could build some kind of framework at some point in time which people can leverage. It's essentially an example almost like, well, we've done the heavy lifting to pass the YAML,
That's right.
and you just need to here's an example of how you can make certain assertions or something like that.
Right.
But
well, and
yeah,
if we're going down that route, bats might be the best. It's a very simple bash-based assertion testing thing. So
okay,
basically anybody could learn it. And then we could have our own function that we build into the bash shell environment that could do something like, just do a search for BATS. Yeah. And it uses bash syntax all the way down. I think I found one example of a GitLab project using it. The main reason why I'm kind of thinking about this is when you think about the domain of GitLab CI, okay? Ignoring everything else. The domain of GitLab CI is shell scripts.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
So this would fit that. It's not like, honestly, if you say what's itch would Joel personally like to scratch, I'd love to do something in Ruby just as an excuse, but I'm trying to think about the users and what would best suit them. I think like a very simple start could be using that diff program. Very simple, easy to understand. I put some YAMLs in here and I just run your command that maybe use diff in the background or whatever. Actually, we wouldn't even have to have a command. We could just have diff and what would we do to grab the YAML? I guess we'd have a little script that we'd include that they could use to take their CI down as a merged YAML. And then they could use diff against that. We'd auto inject it, right? And then they could before script or whatnot. And then they could use diff against this common path and another path in their repo that has the check they want to do validation for. And it'd be super simple and it would fit very much in that ecosystem. It's not as cool, it's not as sexy, but maybe that would be the most user friendly. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's something where I guess we could overthink it to some extent, like, as I say, I love Ruby for some obvious reasons, but I think that the primary, if we're talking about unit testing, which I think we agreed we were sort of talking about, it's kind of making sure that if I include the component with these kind of options, then this is basically what it's going to spit out, what it's going to generate.
Let me do a quick screen share if you stop sharing, I'll do a quick screen share here. So a little bit of what I'm thinking. Let me just create a new YAML document. Bob.yml. So I'd have my, include, and then I'd have component blah/test. And then I would have, how would this work? No, okay, yeah, blah test input. Oh, this would be weird. Oh, I'm having issues. Oh, wait. Okay, I'm sorry. Give me a moment. I'm getting to it. Job spec. And then this would be
So I would recommend that we have a file in the so in your
Yeah, this
GitLab
is
YAML
horrible.
so I would include the blah test component in.
But if we went down this road, my comparison YAML. So this would be their definition of a unit test. When you're testing your jobs, yeah, actually, you know what? I could simplify that. So I would have component. So they don't have to go that far. Actually, can we do objects in here?
Don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. So this isn't as bad.
Yeah, I see. I was thinking that basically the blah test component would read from a file in the repo. So whether it's a YAML or a JSON or whatever it might be, so you can basically extract this bit. Yeah, pretty much. Or even a folder. I know we talked about you could have like multiple files and like
the problem with that is mapping your comparison with the test. Unless we did a multi-file.
Well, I was thinking a multiple in, multiple out almost. So like you have one.yam or like one in.yaml and one out.yaml or
my opinion, that's not friendly for the user because they're always having to think about the indexes of how they put them in. And if they get it messed up, they get unexpected results. I've seen systems like that. I've hated using them personally. So I think it has to be a little bit a map. So what you could do
combine the input and the output inside the same file or something.
So like this, my unit test, my comparison.
But then maybe, I suppose if that's using.
And then you in our script, we just split it by the colon.
Yeah.
And then there's a clear mapping between a test definition and the I forget the fixture.
Yeah, if we want the input YAML to be exactly the same as the GitLab CI YAML, if that makes sense, then that's a nice way of doing it. If we don't mind about the structure being a bit different, we could actually include the input and the output in the same YAML potentially.
That's right. So the trick is that we just have to parse it and separate out those two YAML documents.
But I quite like the idea that where this ties in nicely is to the kind of downstream pipeline strategy that I'm sort of championing a bit at the moment, where I'm saying, do you mind if I share?
No, I would like to say one thing about that though. I've seen complicated pipelines with downstreams. They are a miserable thing to parse visually. I personally strongly discourage using downstream pipelines unless you have a strong reason because of how busy it makes your pipeline run look.
So one of the sort of, I think I mentioned a few reasons why I like them, and I agree there are some drawbacks, but one of the great things is that each of these this could be a GitLab CI YAML. Do you know what I mean? We're not.
Yes, I do.
I'm trying to think how I did it previously. I don't know if I can get this back to a sort of old version to see how I probably. I think I jumped to this fairly soon when I saw the technique used. But I might have, in fact, you know what? I think I probably have got ticket/components in here. I've probably got. So the test
AWS Lambda, I feel for you.
for this includes so some of the annoying things I had to do, for example, is override the job name for each test case because you can't have multiple jobs with the same name in the same pipeline. So it gets around all of this kind of nonsense, if I can call it that. And I got really caught up on this one specifically, right? Because I was overriding the job name.
You still have the same job name of both.
Sorry, this is actually a dependency. This is where do I get some dependent artifacts from? It's not the job name. I think the job name for this is actually completely dynamically built based on some of these parameters, if that makes sense. That's the solution at the time. This is going back a bit further.
Yeah, that would be hard for a user to really understand, right?
But what I got caught out by was I actually was using I don't know what you call this, like a template or a base job, and extending it. And these jobs had dynamic names, but this base job didn't. So I was getting bizarre. I couldn't understand what was happening because my base job was
whichever last one ran is the one that was actually being extended.
Pretty much. So I was getting some really weird results. So again, like with using the downstream pipelines, all of that just goes away.
Yes.
So there's a few. So if we look at
it's like with a lot of things, right? There's pros and there's cons.
Absolutely.
And then the main question is whether or not, from the user's perspective, what's going to give them the better experience. Now, this is just a personal opinion, right? But you look at this, it's not immediately obvious, particularly if you're not used to triggered pipelines. What that right arrow even means. And even when you click it, you're not 100% sure what it represents, because in certain cases, that could be a completely different GitLab CI YAML in a different repository. In this case, it's a different one here. And there's a lot of questions. So like, I'm highly autistic and very, detail, all that sort of stuff. My brain just shuts down because I know all the variables of what this could be representing, and I don't know, and it drives me insane. Me, personally, as an individual.
Again, like I think at the moment, for me, the benefits outweigh, like the pros outweigh the I wish there was a way to achieve the same thing, but almost really like a parameter.
Components need to get a little bit more sophisticated. Now, one of my big worries too is it seems like they're trying to mimic GitHub Actions, which is the biggest sin that any company has ever inflicted. I saw steps too. I saw the steps language. I said, that is GitHub Actions. No, GitLab. We went to CI because we hated GitHub Actions, and now you're trying to recreate it?
I have a somewhat, I don't know whether it's good or bad. It probably has some negatives, but a huge positive that I don't really use GitHub. So like when people sort of say, oh, you can do this or that or whatever. But
I've used both heavily. I loved GitHub in the early days. Microsoft taking over though it's funny enough, you actually have a principal engineer for CI. I can't remember the guy's name. He was the one that developed GitHub's original CI solution, which he said actually quite a bit like what GitLab's was. I had a talk with him at my last company. It was great. And he said, then Microsoft took it over and they went with this other thing that was gross garbage. And I left and went to GitLab. And you're mimicking what Microsoft's doing with your steps language.
Right. Okay.
Honestly, it's a travesty if that actually becomes mainstream.
I don't know.
You need to really think about the essence of your GitLab CI YAML. There is something about that really connects with developers. It is very understandable, right? If you want to do some of this extensibility, that's great, but don't try to do it like GitHub does it. Find a way that really fits well with the simple GitLab CI YAML structure. And that's something developers are going to love.
I must admit, I don't even specifically know the problem we're solving. I guess it is composability.
I think I do understand it. You want to have reusable components, right? You want to be able to have your GitLab CI YAML not be 1,000 pages long every time you start a new project. So how do we abstract away concepts, right? Now, you have some of that with the CI/CD components, but the problem is it's more like a template that you drop in instead of a reusable component where you have a job and you bring in bits and pieces that you want, right? Which is what I think that they're trying to do. But you have to be very careful, because if you take away from the simplicity of your current thing, people are going to actually go to GitHub instead. Because I already got this here and it's cheaper.
Yeah, would it not be though that you've got the choice that you can go, like you can use normal sort of component or whatever you want to call it, jobs, or actually I can't quite do what I need to do. I need something at a lower level. I don't know. I don't know.
So imagine the third option though, right? Third option is you go back and think about how can we introduce this new functionality, but make it really fit in with what makes us great, what makes us different than GitHub, and really rethink about how we can introduce this in a very clean way that fits in with the existing patterns. I think it'd be great if you just have jobs, normal jobs, no new top level keyword, and you can choose instead of an image, something like this other thing. But then also have the before script, after script, all the customizations, try to make it feel like a normal job that you're plugging in additional stuff in. So it's very seamless.
Right. So you mean, instead of an image, I can almost refer to a component or something as the image. It's like, use this, but you can still provide all the same. That's interesting. Interesting.
It's just, I know we're on a tangent, obviously. It's just something I'm very passionate about, because I was a platform engineer trying to convince people why GitLab was superior. And I knew some departments that were switching over to GitHub, and the developers were dismayed because they were going to have to use GitHub CI. And they loved GitLab CI. That was honestly a big differentiating factor for developers. It's probably the biggest one. When you compare Travis, Circle CI, GitHub, GitLab has the best syntax by far. But then trying to copy the patterns of the others is going to lose that devoted developer base, because that's why they're on you. Besides the open source part, which obviously is a big deal for a lot of developers too.
Yeah. And my assumption is that it's that the intention isn't to be like, oh, let's do it how GitHub does it, but that the problem space has been examined and the solution just happens to be something similar. But so I've not really.
Well, and you even support, you can reuse the GitHub Actions here. And that's dangerous, because then you're going to have people going to another source to get the distribution of these things. And once they've invested in all that, it's that much easier for them just to jump to GitHub.
Yeah.
That big tangent. I'm just passionate about it, as you can probably tell.
Absolutely. So I'm trying to think if we had anything else to try and cover off. So the other thing that I know, or I don't know, I've sort of vaguely seen, and I'm sort of interested or tempted, is, so you've got your own component library, but a bunch of them are basically are they GitLab templates that you've converted to CI components, but we haven't sort of formally whatevered them.
Yeah, so in Jitsu Dojo, there's the two. There's a Kaneko and the Python one. Yeah. I took the existing templates, I converted them over and added some additional features that were requested in those tickets. So it really is the one-to-one migration. So I am a little bit confused about why there's a debate about somebody owns a template today, right?
Yeah, this is basically the conversation that I haven't had in any depth, but in passing, like I've sort of, my view on it, and I'll probably try and move this forward, would be just to do it. We've got one of our values or sub values is a bias for action, basically. So just to do it. The small concern is just like that without a DRI, without whatever we call them, directly responsible individual, like one single person that it all sort of falls down to, that it'll just kind of I don't know, go unmaintained or whatever. But I'm a bit sort of like, well, we've already got the CI template,
Yeah.
and like, you know,
That one hasn't been looked at in a long time.
yeah, and if it does the same as that for now, then great. If people want it to do something differently, community contributors will contribute. If if
And
we
I'd even be
internally want
willing
it,
to be like co-owner, and I'll even be reactive to requests and stuff like that.
yeah, like I'm a bit sort of like let's do it, let's just do it. So I will again, I'll kind of follow up internally and sort of suggest.
Nice.
I might even go as far as to create the projects and get you to like raise an MR to migrate the stuff over from yours to theirs. The only thing that I possibly could say to buy us just a little bit of time is maybe we want to try now this release component and make a bit of progress with the test component, because then we can sort of use some of that in our as we're building these new components, if that makes sense.
Well, it's interesting. I'm using the toolkit component on all my new ones for everything now, including the release. Actually, no, not the release. I'm waiting. I want to, and so they'd be a poster child of using toolkit for those common actions that GitLab does own.
Yeah.
And yeah, the test thing is really the one big miss, because a job completing doesn't tell you anything. What if the job isn't even doing what you intended to do, but it happened not to fail?
So let's touch on that a little bit as well, because again, the testing we talked about earlier, the unit testing, that all it's going to do is test that given this input, you get that output. And
that's a unit test.
Yeah. So do you think we're missing, or like, have you had any consideration for would you call it like
integration
end to end or integrate? Yeah.
Very much so. That's still a missing piece. That requires a lot. So I'm a big extreme programming, TDD, London style, not Chicago style. Represent, right? I'm Canadian, so we're still tied. Development. So your unit tests give you confidence that black box, your individual unit of functionality, which here we're calling a component, for the given input gives the desired output. And that's enough if you do it extensively to give you all the guarantees in the world that you need. But at the same point, it's only through an integration test that you can prove that out, right? That, okay, I have a hypothesis that these unit tests fully cover out, but what happens when I actually run it?
Yes.
But hey, to verify that, you have to still look at inputs and outputs. A job running is an output, but I would argue not a valuable one. Generally, with an integration test, you still want to have a boundary that you're able to mock out and verify that it's properly engaged with. For instance, if you're going to ultimately, you consider the most important thing that happens is the commands that run and whether or not they're able to function. You really have to be able to inspect, did those commands run? Did the commands run with the arguments I thought? You really need something that would stand in for the shell and record what it receives. And then you can go ahead and do assertions.
You need to mock stuff and
That's right. So that's the sort of integration test. It's more complicated. I still think it's very important if you want to treat components as proper software artifacts, right? If you want to have that.
And I want to say that I guess it's really hard to explain. Like, I would say like some of this, maybe the markdown link. Let me just have a look at that one. So what I'm doing with this one specifically is testing things like, okay, this config, we're saying we're going to allow failure, and we're pointing it specifically to a markdown file that is going to fail.
Okay. And then you want to check the exit code then.
So yeah, we're kind of checking like, but this is, what would I call this? Like a manual test, or so it runs automatically, but you need to manually validate and verify. It did what it was supposed to do. It failed, but it it was allowed to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Okay, imagine with me, you have your own Docker image that has a shell, and you replace the shell with something that will record.
yeah.
And it and then you're able to evaluate what runs, and then you could have a test that was going to do assertions on that output. And it could even check, like if it's forking out, it can see what the exit code is, and it could report it. It could report the standard out, the standard error. It could report the command that's run. And really, those are, let me see, the command run with its arguments, standard out, standard error, and exit code are really all you need to do a full level integration test, right? And it could even pass it through.
The challenge that I'm seeing here is that would do a full integration test for the script, but
Yeah.
not for anything above and below. Do you know what I mean? Not the before script, the after script, the allow failure,
The before script it would, because often the before script is setting things up for you, right? And so those are going to impact the environment that the commands run in. And so if the before script isn't properly happening, it's like when I'm doing an integration test, there's the implicit test and the explicit test, okay? Implicit test is I know my program, if it doesn't have this environment set up, is not going to behave the way I expect it to when I assert its primary outputs. And so I'm implicitly testing the environment by testing my program with those outputs, particularly if they somehow materially affect how it's running, because then I could see some of the data's off because it doesn't have that thing that it needed. After script, no, definitely it would not. Though actually it would. Ha, 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 ha.
Right.
You didn't think about that. You didn't think about that. It's your shell. You're bypassing the shell. The before script and after script use the same shell. Everything would be recorded.
Okay. So, but then you've got all the artifacts, the allow failure, the variables go in, so that's okay. So like, but it's an interesting.
If you don't mind, let's think about that, because your statement has me going now. The unit test would. So here's a big thing about testing. Test what you own. Don't test what you know works. So when you think about artifacts and stuff, if the YAML is properly formed, we can trust GitLab to do what's necessary with the artifacts.
So here's where I think that falls down. Like the amount of times I've got my glob pattern wrong, or you know, that's basically what I think a full end-to-end test will actually achieve. Is it's making sure that
possible with the GitLab API. So after a job runs, you can use the GitLab API and you can validate what artifacts are attached to make sure that's what's present is. So that'd be another level of library or something.
I think like in certain scenarios, like this is a really nice isolated one, right? Where you can check. So I think there's a code quality artifact. So there's a bunch of stuff that we could validate. But this is quite straightforward, right? Because all we needed was a markdown file to be able to. But if what your thing's doing is like releasing something to Docker Hub or whatever, that's when you sort of then need the mock-in aspect, and it's interesting. I find it really interesting.
Oh, anyway, I do too. So, yeah, because I've had to test some very bizarre things. I've been involved in API integrations with billing systems and third-party equipment vendors. And I've had to deal with, you know, CI/CD automation and the different components you have and how do you verify they're all going to work. I've done this in embedded hardware environments. Testing's so fascinating because you're going at the edge of what developers directly control and what they don't. And how do you verify that that full solution is working? There is no cookie cutter, right?
Yeah.
Everything is different. And it requires a lot of mental ability, really, to think through things at a system level and think about how can I get confidence that the system is working correctly. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is, and I guess that's why I think it was in Timo's sort of conversations. So Timo built the OpenTofu component, and he talks about like I think he writes, I can't remember exactly what it is, but let's say there's like a bash script that is run under the hood. So it's then, right, okay, well, you can unit test that bash script completely outside of, you don't have to worry about like, yeah, GitLab CI essentially, and then you just need to check that the inputs are being converted. Yeah, awesome.
The one
awesome.
problem with that though, like it's valid, but the user, when they see the results, they're not seeing the commands they're expecting to see. So the consumer's perspective, it's making it more of a black box.
Yeah.
If I see the OpenTofu command being run and I'm used to OpenTofu, I'm going to be able to see, okay, this is what I expected to have happen. If I see some random script, I'm going WTF.
Yeah.
What's even happening?
Yeah.
But it's like valid. Once again, the pros and cons. The pro is obviously you can test that. You can use bats.
Yeah.
You can test that. You can have a great degree of confidence. But then from the user's perspective, now all of a sudden there's pixie dust and they don't believe in fairies.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So what I'm going to take away from this, I'm going to share some feedback, even though we discussed it on that release MR, just my opinionated, like mainly the job name, and I'll mention the API thing. And the testing one, I'll just throw up to, did you want to share an update actually on the testing one before I try and get like some other eyes on it, just on what your latest...
I think what we have on issue is probably good enough to just get, I want to get some ideas, because ultimately I don't want to do something just for me. I'm jazzed about, impacting people. So I want to find something that is going to meet our users and meet GitLab well. So the more eyes on it, the better. I'm not in a mad rush.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, sounds good. I'll try and get some more eyes, and I'll see about creating the projects to move your components over. But as I say, if we time and coincide that with either the release and or the testing, I think would be fun.
Oh yeah, and it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your time, Joe, and don't hesitate to chase me if you need anything, because I do sometimes miss these pings.
Well, I know, being in the community, you're going to be so ADD, it's not funny because things are coming from all angles. And if you don't mind, I have a technical interview with GitLab tomorrow. If you can send some good vibes my way.
I will, absolutely.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Keep me posted. Thanks, Joe. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.